My name's David Swanson, and I used to be a reporter, something like yourself. I worked for newspapers in Virginia, then I worked in Washington, D.C. reporting for labor publications, and I then became a communications person on the other side of the telephone. I was the communications person for Acorn for 3 years, and I left to be the press secretary for Kucinich for president in '04. After which I worked for the labor movement, and then since early '05, I've been working for peace and justice organizations. Co-founder of AfterDowningStreet.org, a website and a coalition that we put together in May of '05 when the Downing Street minutes came out, that were at that point the most authoritative piece of evidence we had of what we all knew, that we were lied into the war in Iraq.
What should be scaring us is the certainty of what will happen if we do not impeach. And that is, we will have established a country in which the president writes the laws, picks which laws to obey, and can take us into wars on the basis of lies and torture and murder. This is what we should be afraid of.
I'm on the board of Progressive Democrats of America and Voters for Peace and the Backbone campaign. I'm working on a campaign that hasn't launched yet to undo the feared Supreme Court ruling that will take away all limits on corporate spending in elections. I make websites for peace and justice groups. I give speeches, I write books, I write articles in magazines, I blog, and I try to disrupt the war machine. People have gone through this foolish cycle of expecting an election to change everything and then being disappointed and discouraged that it didn't. And you say, can we get back to real work of activism to push change at the local, state, national levels through Congress, where we ought to want the power to be because of the danger of leaving it with the president? And people will literally tell you, why should we try that when electing a different president didn't work?
Do you think that Obama used the progressives?
But I think to a much greater extent, progressives use themselves. I mean, the thinking was that he's speaking to his funders and the corporate media, and secretly he's a populist. But, you know, if you're gonna be a populist, you're gonna be a populist up front. You're not going to be better than your promises unless you're forced to be. And we're accepting the idea that we should replace a bad dictator with a good dictator, and a president should be able to come in and change everything. Never mind that the next president could just come in and unchange it. So it's the wrong place to look for a savior. We should be looking to ourselves, to serious organizing at the local level in every district, and to pressuring the representatives closest to us, those in the House, to impose our will on the president.
We see a war that should have never been authorized and should have never been waged. A war that after $500 billion and over 3,000 of our bravest young men and women lost, we actually find ourselves less safe than we were before.
There's no question that he committed to progressive ideals and went back on them, that his vague rally rhetoric was always more progressive than his detailed policy platforms. Well, people expected some things that have been broken promises, without question. This president was very eloquent about denouncing practices such as rewriting laws with signing statements, and then did it for his first 5 months and then developed something worse. And even promises on health care that he's just gone back on.
We all know that we spend more money on health care than every nation on earth. $1.9 trillion a year. And despite that, we've got 46 million people uninsured. It's not as if we couldn't solve this problem. And so what's been lacking is not technical solution. What's been lacking is the political will.
Health care now! Health care now! Health care now! Health care now! Health care now!
The White House and the Senate are forcing the House to go with the Senate bill, essentially. But even the House bill, I think, is worse than nothing. I don't think it's too late to force the bill to be better than nothing, but it would require forcing it, not just wishing. And when you have the leaders of the so-called Progressive Caucus out there saying, what a great bill, we're going to vote for it, even though last June, For the first time in history, they put their foot down, and 57 of them wrote a letter to the Speaker of the House saying, unless it meets these standards, we won't support it. And 55 of them flipped and voted yes, even though it did not meet those standards. That damage is as devastating to the future of our government as passing a bad health care bill, because we don't have a progressive caucus. We don't have anybody to represent the majority of Americans in Congress who does things as opposed to saying things. I don't want health insurance reform, because when you leave the insurance companies in existence and in power and they're writing the details of the bill where the devil is, you're not going to fix anything. But a bill that doesn't fix the fundamental problems, and now a bill that mandates giving your money to a corporation. I mean, these people worship the market, the almighty market. And here's a market decision. I don't want to spend my money on that crap. And they're going to require me to. But the bizarre thing is that I think tens of millions of Americans expected this president to be better, to be secretly plotting to be better than his campaign platform. And then we're disappointed that we didn't get that. He was asked during the primaries, will you prosecute these crimes? And he gave those lines about looking forward, not backward. I mean, this stuff didn't come out after the election. I mean, his promise on telecom immunity, and he would fight it and filibuster, and he turns around and votes for it, despite that being the #1 demand of his supporters, that he keep that promise. This is someone who came in and said, I'm against the war, while voting to fund it in the Senate. I mean, we knew who he was, and I voted for him, but voting ought to be such a minor part of what we do. I mean, to send the message to the world that we would elect someone like John McCain, or even permit him to steal an election and have it be close enough to steal, would have been such a horrible message to ourselves as well as the rest of the world. But, you know, if McCain had become president, the peace movement wouldn't have been defunded, activist groups wouldn't have been disbanded when the election happened. Peace groups like United for Peace and Justice, their funding just went away. Groups that were advocating for upholding the Constitution and the rule of law just had to shut up, shut their doors, because there was no more money. If George W. Bush had gone to Oslo and given a speech glorifying war while accepting a peace prize, we would have all been scandalized and shocked and embarrassed and humiliated. When this president does the same thing, we don't have the same reaction. So this filter of party is deeply in everybody's awareness. You can find good changes. Well, they have a better Labor Department, they have better policies on all kinds of issues, better Supreme Court nominees, and so forth. But on issues of war and peace and distribution of wealth and abuses of power and human rights, no changes except for the worse. You know, we have more troops in the field than ever with Bush and Cheney, bigger military budget than ever, bigger war budget than ever, bases in more countries than ever, expanded use of unmanned drones, which John Yoo, Mr. Torture Lawyer, is just cheering for, not for their precision, but for their illegality. He's just thrilled that the president will do something so illegal so frequently on the big issues that we care about. It's a disaster, and you can't say, oh, well, I'm for this domestic program, I don't care about wars, because that's where all the money goes. Now a lot of it goes to Wall Street, but on a regular basis in this country, what differentiates this country from Europe is that it all goes to wars.
Yeah.
Well, there is a plan of attack in my book, and there is a list of to-do items with bullet points, and I blog all the time with things that people can currently do on various websites. But I think in terms of going after our federal government, forget the president, forget the Senate, and focus on the House, and set aside the idea that politeness is a top value, and go after these people as if they were committing mass murder. But work for successes at the local and state levels, where there's so much more achievable. Counter recruitment. Start credit unions and get your money out of these banks. Make clean elections at the local and state levels. Pass resolutions, as cities are doing, saying if these criminals come here, they will be arrested. Pursue civil cases and foreign cases and angles of accountability through courts. There's so many things people can do. And improving the media is, I think, the top of the list and the easiest thing for anybody to be engaged in.